Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma said he, quote, will have a lot of questions. It's really important that we have leadership there that's able to support the intelligence agencies. Senator John Cornyn of Texas gave a speech praising most of Trump's national security nominees by name, but left Gabbard conspicuously off the list. Cornyn aide declined to say whether the omission was deliberate. So why is Tulsi Gabbard causing such high-level and special alarm? Well, her past comments have often been at odds with the U.S. intelligence community's assessments. In 2017, she said she was skeptical that Syria's President Bashar al-Assad was behind a chemical weapons attack that killed dozens. And she visited him. She went to Syria to visit him shortly after. She has sympathized with Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, who are both accused of leaking troves of classified information. And she has repeated Russian talking points and propaganda, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Take a listen.
You hear President Biden say, well, this is Putin's war. This is Putin's fault. It's Putin who's the one who's solely responsible. Well, the United States and some of these European NATO countries are fueling this war. There are 25 to 30 U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. Ukraine is in an active war zone with widespread bombing, artillery, and shelling, and these facilities, even in the best of circumstances, could easily be compromised and release these deadly pathogens. The only way that this war ends is through some kind of a negotiated treaty. That's it. That's been true from the very beginning.
Does that mean giving up Ukrainian land?
It means, I think, both sides, like in all treaties, will end up having to surrender some portion of what they want.
Meanwhile, on the global stage, Russia's aggressive actions go much further than Ukraine. The Czech foreign minister said that up to 100 suspicious incidents in Europe this year could be attributed to Russia. They include cyber attacks, arson, incendiary devices, sabotage, and even murder plots. Trump's pick for DNI under scrutiny is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security analyst John Brennan is here. Also joining us, professor of history at New York University, Ruth Ben-Ghiat joins us, plus former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, MSNBC national security analyst Frank Figluzzi's here, and Paul Rieckhoff is still with us at the table. Director Brennan, I start with you. We've had a lot of conversations about Tulsi Gabbard. I've asked Malcolm Gladwell and others, Turnbull and others, about how Tulsi Gabbard would change the way other countries, traditional allies, would deal with us. What's striking about Tulsi Gabbard's nomination is that there's been no explanation for it by anybody. There's no one out there sort of knocking back any of what we just played, any of those clips, that she constantly and inexplicably parrots Russian propaganda. And there's really no explanation for why she was picked in the first place. Do you, with your contacts and your experience, have any understanding of why she's been tapped for this post?
Well, Nicolle, I think it's pretty straightforward, because Donald Trump, who is following basically the authoritarian's playbook, which is you want to control the instruments of power, which include the intelligence community, security services, law enforcement, as well as try to do everything possible to control the media. And so having somebody like a Tulsi Gabbard as director of national intelligence, as someone who is malleable, I think, in his hands, and really just, demonstrates how foolish the appointment or selection would be. The Director of National Intelligence is one of the most, if not the most, challenging leadership management positions in the U.S. government, to orchestrate the activities of 18 departments and agencies that constitute the U.S. intelligence community. And as is pointed out, she is eminently unqualified. She has no intelligence experience. She showed very questionable judgment in terms of the things that she's done, meeting with President Assad of Syria, being very sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. But also very concerning to me is the way she has been trafficking in these conspiracy theories, whether it's about the 2020 presidential election or the deep state, Biden crime family, or these bioweapon labs in Ukraine. Either she's foolish enough to believe these things, or she knowingly propagates disinformation for her own personal and political objectives. You don't want a person like that at the helm of the U.S. intelligence community at such a challenging time internationally. So again, I think this is, Donald Trump's effort to try to control, again, the instruments of power, and to have somebody at the helm who's going to change or affect or limit the amount of intelligence. And the signal it sends to our partners and allies around the globe, I think, is going to be quite chilling in terms of what the U.S. intelligence community is going to look like in the future, an intelligence community that so many of our partners and allies rely on.
Director Brennan, having the intelligence agencies of the United States of America, and by extension all of our allies, because the allies share intelligence, has always been, and maybe it's a mistake, right, that it was a norm, but it's always been viewed as a treasured asset that the President of the United States has singular access to and authority over. But the idea that Trump is the first person who'll ever become president who's been charged with the felony of mishandling national defense information, the classified material that was stolen and not returned and stored carelessly at Mar-a-Lago, the rooms that were flooded to try to hide that alleged crime, the obstruction of justice that Donald Trump allegedly undertook to keep that material, turns the whole thing on its head, right? We're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, and I wonder if you think we should also be talking about Donald Trump's record of mishandling national defense information.
I think that record is quite clear to everyone. I mean, when he was in the Oval Office, he showed this callous disregard for the importance of making sure that this country's secrets are kept secret. He would leave information out. He would share secrets in the Oval Office, including with Russians and others. Look what happened at Mar-a-Lago in terms of the recklessness with which he treated this country's secrets, those top secret, very highly sensitive documents that were left uncontrolled down there. And he also has disparaged the U.S. intelligence community and a lot of the U.S. assessments. He would take Putin's side in terms of believing what Vladimir Putin says about not interfering in U.S. elections against the considered judgment and assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. So again, I think Donald Trump wants to have people, again, in charge of these organizations, these agencies, who are not going to pose any type of threat to what he wants to accomplish and do. And so, again, she is going to be, I think, a pawn in his hands. And, looking at the other people that he's identified, Kash Patel at FBI, I mean, this just, again, demonstrates across the board that he has no regard, no respect for these institutions that really help keep this country strong and safe and make sure that we're able to maintain the rule of law.
I mean, Frank Figliuzzi, it leaves us sort of at the mercy of how many of these appointments the Republican senators who for 9 years have had no appetite for being any sort of pushback against things that Donald Trump wants to do that threaten U.S. national security. But Punchbowl News is reporting that senators are, let me read it to you. Quote, Republican senators have privately discussed their interest in viewing Tulsi Gabbard's FBI file. That's according to 3 sources familiar with the conversations. This is done for each cabinet nominee, but the implication is that the documents could reveal previously unknown information about Tulsi Gabbard, including possible foreign contacts. What are the prospects of something comprehensive being done? It's also being reported by the Washington Post that the Trump team has signed an agreement to allow the Justice Department to conduct background checks on nominees and staff. That memorandum of understanding has finally been signed. How much realistically can be investigated on these picks ahead of a confirmation process?
Yeah, great question. So this is a crack we're seeing in the armor of the Trump transition team, this agreement to ostensibly allow FBI background investigations when he said he wasn't going to do it. I think that's an important revelation that the Senate is having some impact here. But hope and crossing your fingers isn't a plan for national security. Hoping that the Senate does the right thing, hoping the Judiciary Committee wants to preserve its advice and consent powers, that's not doing it for me. So yes, I think the FBI needs to go into high gear. The answer as to how fast backgrounds can get done is very fast. January 20th is a realistic deadline. I've been through it as a street agent, and I've been through it as an assistant director. We will move hell and earth to absolutely get the background done. Every agent in a field office, if, God, as we used to say, oh no, they nominated somebody from my field office territory, everything comes to a stop, and hundreds of interviews are done regarding that nominee. And existing files, and this may become important with regard to Tulsi Gabbard, existing files are scrubbed throughout the intelligence community. And if you're traveling to Damascus and you're meeting with Bashar Assad, there's got to be some intelligence community files on that, and that will be inserted into the background report. I
mean, Frank, if you're handed this file and told, you know, the Senate Republicans, the Senate, Democrats and Republicans want to see the vet on Tulsi Gabbard, where do you start? What's your theory of the case? Do you take the public statements and work backward? Again, it's a dual track. Do we have any existing holdings on this particular nominee? And then do our allies have any existing holdings? It's not just us and our intel community that would be covering a trip to Syria and certain phone communications and all of that. If you're dealing with people like this, particularly in Russia and other adversarial places, you're going to have coverage of some of that. So that's in there. And then literally hundreds of interviews regarding neighbors, associates. Is she qualified? Are you concerned? Is she capable of loyalty to the United States? Do you have any concerns? Ex-boyfriends, professors, all of it gets covered, and all of it gets put into a very thick report highlighting, here are some concerns in the following categories: ability, associates, reputation, loyalty to the United States, financial difficulties. Who's funding these trips that she's taking? And real quick, you referenced an account of her trip to Syria. You got to read this account out there. There's a translator who says that she came upon these young girls who had burns over most of their body because they had been struck by air-to-ground missiles. And Tulsi asked the girls, how do you know that Assad did this to you? How do you know it's not ISIS? So she doesn't even understand that ISIS doesn't have their own jets. They can't do that. So she's either ignorant or she's really swallowed the Putin line with regard to Syria. I mean, you're getting at something more subtle maybe, or maybe less subtle than contacts, and it's competence and fitness. What is the FBI capable of doing in that category?
It is part of an FBI background investigation to do a deep dive into competency, experience, capability, reputation. All of that gets covered. If you have enough people, you know, think about it. Think about doing those interviews. Hey, I'm going to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard. Do you think she's qualified to run 18 agencies in the U.S. intelligence community? What experience does she have in that regard? I don't know what the answer to that is. She was a medic in the military. I don't know. She was a congressperson. I don't know if she's qualified. I don't know how anybody can look at you with a straight face and go, oh, absolutely, she's the pick.
Yeah, I mean, Ruth, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, look, I think Frank's being nice or diplomatic. No, she's not qualified. And I think when you look at Sue Gordon and Gina Haspel, two of the most senior former officials who were tapped to head the CIA, and the deputy director of DNI, they worked for Donald Trump until the very end when Kash Patel was tapped to be her deputy. Gina Haspel was never in the news. CIA ostensibly functioned. You have a ton of authority and power as the President of the United States, especially over agencies like the Pentagon and the CIA. And I wonder what it means when someone like Trump reaches for someone so flagrantly and obviously unqualified for a job like this.
Well, I would say, looking at it from an autocrat's mindset, that the lack of experience